Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Hosting today is Janita Cathy, and here's Janita.
Welcome to It's a Woman's World. My name is Janita Cathy, and I'm joined with my fabulous co-host today, Susan Strauss. How are you, Susan?
I'm good, Janita. Thank you.
And Nadia Jordana.
Hi, happy to be here.
Good to see you. And we're joined with some special guests today. We have Dr. Ellen Kennedy. She's the Executive Director of World Without Genocide at William Mitchell College of Law. And Ellen has two guests with her today she'll introduce in a moment. And they're going to join us and talk a little bit about the cultural awareness, cultural richness, some of the challenges and achievements of Native women. So thank you for joining us today, Ellen. Good to see you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm delighted to introduce my two guests. Kate Voss is a brand new graduate from William Mitchell College of Law.
Woohoo!
And will begin her legal career soon. And Anna Marie Gutsch, sitting on my immediate right, is the Executive Director of the State of Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. She's held that position since June 2006.
Wow.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
Kate is here in a very special capacity. She worked in a legal capacity on an Indian reservation this past spring. So firsthand knowledge of some of the challenges that you refer to.
Wow.
I worked out at the Menominee Reservation in Wisconsin, which is about 4 hours east of here. So,
And
And
doing
what
what?
we were representing criminal defendants in tribal court. There's no such thing as the right to counsel for that tribe, and so if you can't afford a lawyer, you don't have a lawyer. So a group of law students went out there and represented people for free, and it was a great experience.
bet.
So how does that work? Since it's not in a court of law, but it's in tribal court, what's the difference there?
Well, different tribal courts, they're all different. Some are more like the Anglo system than others. Some are more traditional. The one in Menominee was pretty much like the state court system, but there are a lot of similar rules, some different rules, and it was a great experience for law students to get some practice appearing in court and meeting with clients and learning how to discuss things with clients. And of course, they got free legal representation.
Yes.
So since they don't have the right to counsel, I know we're going to talk about a lot of other things as well, but if they don't have the right to counsel, do they handle anything more than a misdemeanor, or do they handle felonies this way and you could be like sentenced for multiple months and years without any attorney?
Well, that's an interesting topic. You can be sentenced to felonies. However, there is a limitation with tribes that you can't be sentenced for over a year. You can get some consecutive sentencing. So I think you might know better than me. 3 years is the max. Maybe, I think it depends on the tribe. But so if you get sentenced to do time in a tribal jail, you're not going to be there for over 1 year.
And then one last question, what determines where the court proceedings are held? If the crime happened on the reservation, or if it happened in that same city, but like in downtown Menominee, which is that what determines whether or not it's handled on the reservation as opposed to the regular county or city courthouse?
Yep, there are a couple of factors. You've got to look at the status of the person who committed the crime, whether they're Indian or not, and whether the crime occurred in Indian country within the reservation or outside. If it's outside, the state will have jurisdiction, and inside, if it's an Indian defendant, then the tribe would have jurisdiction. If it's a non-Indian defendant, then either the state could have jurisdiction or the federal government could have jurisdiction. It's a really tricky issue and an important issue because with a lot of violence against women issues, one of the big things there is the jurisdictional challenges, and that confusion has sometimes allowed violence against women to not be prosecuted, and so it's a very interesting issue. We could talk about that all this whole time.
Yes.
But Kate made a really interesting point, and that is the issue of jurisdiction for crimes against women, for violence against women. And in the United States, at the federal level, the Violence Against Women Act was recently reauthorized with additional provisions to prosecute perpetrators of violence against women on the reservations. And
Great.
that was led in large part by some of the faculty at William Mitchell College of
Oh,
Law.
that's
So,
wonderful.
Yeah, Sarah Deer, she was just awarded the 2014 MacArthur Genius Grant, so we're very proud of her there.
Good.
And it's great because it allows tribes to exercise jurisdiction over non-Indian defendants in domestic violence cases, and which is a big deal because I think that there's the highest rate of interracial marriage between Indian women and non-Indian and their spouses. So that was a big issue of domestic violence not being prosecuted because these women's husbands were not Indian. So now the tribe can have jurisdiction over that, and hopefully that'll make a big difference. So.
Interesting.
One of the things that most people are not familiar with is where the reservations are here in the state. Do you want to comment on that, Anna Marie?
You know, I found that it is, throughout Minnesota, since we are not educated about tribal nations, most individuals do not know where the tribal nations are, the reservations, and there are 11 tribal nations, as you see. If you look in the middle of the map and you divide it just below Mille Lacs, those are the 4 Ojibwe nations. I'm from Red Lake, which is up there in the very top on the left side as I'm looking, and then below that are the 4 Dakota tribes. And most people, they don't know where these are located because we're not taught these very basic things in our public schools.
No.
We have a curriculum that's largely absent of teaching to American Indian and the contributions in the state. So,
Wow. And then in relation to the reservations, how much interaction happens between the residents of each of the reservations?
how much between the residents? Well, a lot of interaction happens. Well, one of the things is Indian Affairs Council is made up of all of the tribal nations. The heads of the tribal nation or a designee is a chair on our board. So we meet quarterly and we discuss issues of importance in the state of Minnesota primarily, federal issues too. There's a fair amount of interaction and a lot of relatives. So.
And what is the perception? So if you grew up in Red Lake, if someone chooses to move from the reservation, is that frowned upon, or and are you always welcomed back when you become an adult or you graduate? Whatever you're doing in life, are you welcomed back, and can you move back at any time in your life?
You know, I can live on Red Lake at any time because I'm a member of Red Lake, and I did not grow up there. So I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota, non-Indian town. The first time I experienced working on the Red Lake Reservation was as the State Government Relations Director under Chairman Whitefeather, and that was in late 1990s, early 2000. And it's kind of amazing that was really the first time that I went back in to the tribe and worked with the people. And the first thing someone said to me was, "Welcome home."
Wow.
And I knew so much about the traditional ways of our people from my father, and having lived those out on a daily basis, that I knew very well that I needed to go in to listen and to serve the people, not go in there as from an outsider's perspective, a person that worked in state government and with various agencies and at the legislature, and come in and tell them what needs to be done with the people. That's not how we approach the Native people.
And it
But
seems
I came
like-
in as a servant.
Yeah, it seems like that would have been viewed with standoffish, I would think, in the beginning. Is that correct?
You're exactly right,
Yeah.
because due to our history
Oh,
that
especially then,
we
yeah.
have such division. We have division that we deal with today. Even a person such as myself, who has worked for state government and has been a tribal member and known as an American Indian person by federal classification or designation, there's the reservation is to work with me is always there. So I need to remember that in my role to serve the people, and my goal is ultimately to serve the people. To hear what the voices tell me and then to tell the state of Minnesota, these are the things we still have to do.
I'd like to just ask one other question. You'd mentioned that there's nothing in terms of any curriculum in the schools. And of course, we know that we don't hear about women's contributions, about blacks' contributions, Asians. And so, but especially, I think, natives. I mean, this is your land.
And I was just delighted to hear when I got that email saying that there was interest in writing a bill, a resolution at that time, to create American Indian and Indigenous Peoples Day. Yeah. Same as on the day of Columbus Day.
Yes. Oh, yes.
People have been calling it that like this last year, but it's been just kind of, I think, people that are just very aware, saying, hey, happy Indigenous People Day.
And that
That's
just gave me
awesome.
goosebumps. It should be that.
You know, I think I've been at Indian Affairs almost 9 years now, and I think it was one of the most exciting things that I've seen happen, and just delightful. And the energy in that Senate hearing room
It was great.
was phenomenal when we saw that happen.
So you think that's going to make a difference on getting some curriculum in the schools then?
Well, actually, we made it through the Senate. We didn't make it through the House this year. We're keeping on moving. We'll keep on moving forward until this is something that perhaps passes for the entire state of Minnesota.
Our
Be
plan
nice
is
to have
that
it federal.
Indeed, it would. Our plan is that the passage of bills like this encourages greater awareness. So these are small steps that
Yes.
ultimately we hope will have a significant impact.
I should say there is curriculum. There's curriculum, bits and pieces of curriculum everywhere. The Department of Education has curriculum that they're redoing that was done in the 80s. They're revising. But by and large, since there's really, there's a little mandate for the standards and the benchmarks for students in Minnesota that was passed in 2006, stating that in the standards review process, they have to consider the contributions of American Indian tribes and communities. That was a first. We didn't have any requirements in the state of Minnesota. And we do believe that because of the lack of requirements, to know about the tribal nations, which are the first people in Minnesota, we have an enormous disparity. We do believe that. So, but there's curriculum efforts. Indian Affairs has a curriculum with our treaties exhibit, very successful treaties exhibit. We just won the highest award for state and local history.
Oh, great.
So, but
Congrats.
we're working hard at it. It's an ultimate goal.
You know, you mentioned at the beginning that one of the issues we would talk about are some of the challenges. And we have some information about some of those challenges. One of the most significant, I think, is the income disparity between Minnesota's average incomes in the state and the tribal incomes. And that's what this slide is illustrating. And if we look in even more detail about the situation on the reservations, this slide is looking at the difference between housing characteristics on the reservations and housing characteristics as a national average. And it's really utterly shocking. That disparity comes, as people have said to me, from the legacy of the genocide that was perpetrated on the Native peoples. And the decade after decade and generation, really after generation of trauma, and the inability that any group really has to move forward as well as one would hope after this.
And I think one of the ways that came out to me was the series of articles about the school and
Exactly.
the poverty-stricken
Yes.
school and the terrible equipment and the actual physical structure of the
Right.
school and books and desks. I mean, there's no excuse for that. It was atrocious. I couldn't believe it.
When we look at the issues, they really are so deep and so systemic. Kate was speaking about the legal issues. On this slide, you see from a demonstration that was held in DC, an issue that a lot of people don't know about, and that is during the 1970s, the U.S. government forcibly sterilized upwards of 30% of American Indian women. And when you think about the impact of that kind of action on individuals, on couples, on families, and on a culture, that pain is really unfathomable to most of us.
What was the rationale behind that?
Elimination of the people.
Yeah.
It would have been elimination of the people,
For
just
what-
as the
a
rationals have
genocide.
been.
What did they use to support this? So they're coming to the clinic. What gave them the authorization to perform the sterilization? Like, they just decided, I'm going to just do this because you had a runny nose, and I'm just going to go ahead and sterilize you?
This was happening to other groups at the same time. It was happening to people whose IQs were determined to be below the median level of the average American.
And this was in the
IQ.
70s.
As far in as the 1970s, that's correct. To African Americans, there has been, I think, quite a bit of information revealed about similar efforts for African Americans as well. Really, the extent to which Native Americans in particular have been systemically disadvantaged is something that we really don't speak much about. The educational achievement gap here in this state.
Yes.
The extent to which they are disadvantaged in the criminal justice system. The extent to which, as we saw in the slide about housing on the reservation, the inadequacies. I think the question is really, how do we move forward in the state and certainly at a national level?
And if I could just say, in addition to the forced sterilization, there were boarding schools where
Yes.
we either went in to exterminate Native populations or totally assimilate them and remove their culture, which is, a form of cultural genocide.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because if you look back at many Native populations before colonization happened, women had strong roles in society. They were treated equally. There wasn't this violence against Native women that we now see, and you can just kind of track it from colonization, and that we brought these values that men were above women and valued above women.
And I have to say that those values, we haven't entirely lost our traditional ways. My father just passed away in April. My father taught me, I did not know that there was a gender inequity role. I had no idea, because my father always taught me that I could do anything. And he taught me the ways of our people. So I'm not able to function in a place where I view myself as a lesser individual because I am a woman. He just taught me amazing things. He always, he told me that what I did as a person, as an individual, would always come back to me. So I was always responsible for who I was, not what I looked like, not the color of my skin, not all of those things, but what I did, how I lived, and how I lived in the right way. And so I need to say that those ways have not all been eliminated, and we are working so hard as a collective, those of us who are advocating or trying to change the state of Minnesota, per se, and so that we can understand that these ways of our people are they're phenomenal. They are just wonderful. But we don't have that perception. We do not have that perception.
In 1879, the boarding schools really began in a very official way in the state of Minnesota. And what that meant was that Native children were taken, literally forcibly taken, from their parents, and they were raised in 500 such schools throughout the U.S. that were run by the Catholic Church, largely by the Catholic Church. And the slogan at that time was, "Kill the Indian and save the man."